Quick, hide under the table and don't breathe. The vultures are here. My grandmother Carmen's words were a sharp whisper. Seconds earlier, I had been standing in her enormous dining room in the old family estate, holding a box with her favorite lemon cake. Now I was crawling across the Persian rug, folding myself under the heavy oak table built for 12, the linen tablecloth falling all the way to the floor and turning the space beneath it into a dark little tent. I had barely pulled my legs in when I heard the front door key turn. First came the sharp click of Italian leather shoes. Robert's Oxfords. My husband. But right beside him, the sharp clack of stiletto heels against the marble floor turned my blood to ice. "Oh, Grandma, look what a beautiful girl I brought with me today." Robert's voice dripped with that fake, condescending sweetness he'd started using ever since he decided my grandmother's early Alzheimer's meant she couldn't understand anything anymore. Not that you'll remember her face tomorrow, anyway. Through the gap in the tablecloth, I watched the shoes. Robert's $800 Oxford stopped right next to a pair of red stilettos. A young, careless laugh filled the room. God, I really don't think she gets any of this. It makes me feel kind of bad, the way she looks at us. Relax, Valeria. The old woman's in her own world. And this house is going to be ours very soon anyway. Row, Valeria. The old woman. Without shaking, I pulled out my phone, silenced it, and pressed record. As the timer ticked past 3 seconds, I stared at those $800 shoes and felt something close to nausea. My name is Elena. I'm 34 years old, and Robert would be nothing without me. If his company, Fuentes Real Estate Group, is building anything in the exclusive part of the city today, it's because of my blood, my money, my years. When his company was 3 years from bankruptcy, it was me who injected $120,000, my mother's entire inheritance, to save it. "This is for both of us, my love," he told me back then. I remember that night so clearly. He'd come home pale, his hands shaking, and told me the bank was going to call the loans due within the month. He cried at our kitchen table, actual tears, the kind I hadn't seen from him since our wedding day. I didn't hesitate. I went to my bank the very next morning and wired every cent my mother had left me. I told myself it was what a partner does. I told myself 15 years of marriage meant something. I never once imagined I was simply funding my own eventual eviction, one wire transfer at a time. "Lies, sweetheart, I'm suffocating in this dress," Valeria complained above me, shifting on her heels. "And I had to come by Uber because you wouldn't let me take the Kian. The Kian draws too much attention in this neighborhood, baby. Patience." I clenched my fists in the dark. That $95,000 Porsche Kian was being paid off religiously, month after month, from the account where I deposited my own $4,500 in salary every single month as a freelance architect. While he played alpha male investor in front of his 24-year-old mistress, I had spent 3 years quietly funding his entire lifestyle, wearing clearance rack clothes and putting up with his insufferable mother. I had even turned down a scholarship in Milan worth $40,000 to stay home and bathe my mother-in-law after she fractured her hip. Her gratitude was telling me that Robert deserved a woman with more pedigree. And there she was, standing 18 inches from my nose. I heard the click of a leather briefcase opening above me. Thick sheets of paper dropped onto the table, directly over my head. I thought about my grandmother's diagnosis, delivered 18 months ago by a neurologist who used words like early stage and manageable and still very much herself on good days. I remembered how Robert had latched onto that diagnosis like a drowning man grabbing a rope, how he'd started visiting her twice a week instead of the once a year he used to manage, how he'd suddenly developed such tender patience for a woman he used to complain about at every family dinner. At the time, I'd been almost moved by it. Now, crouched in the dark under her table, I understood exactly what that devotion had actually been. Reconnaissance. Rehearsal. He'd been auditioning the role of the loving grandson for exactly this moment. "Sign here, old lady," Robert said, pulling out a chair. "It's just a birthday card. Your favorite grandson needs a little boost." I knew exactly what it was. Land in the North District. $5 million. He was defrauding his own grandmother to my face. "Hey, Valeria said suddenly, dropping her voice. If the old woman signs this and you get rich, what happens with Elena? Won't she get half? The silence weighed on the room. My phone's timer read 4:12. I angled the microphone upward in the dark, holding my breath. Whatever Robert was about to answer wasn't just going to decide my future. It was going to seal his own devastating financial ruin. Robert let out a low, hoarse laugh, dripping with a superiority that turned my stomach. I heard the clink of glass. He was pouring himself my grandfather's expensive brandy. Half of $5 million? Please, Valeria, do you think I'm an idiot? He drawled. Elena is, how do I put this, useful trash. A maid with a ring on her finger. There won't be a single cent of us going to her. I bit down on my knuckle hard enough to taste the metallic sting of blood. But you put 120,000 of her inheritance into the company, Valeria insisted, in that shrill, grating voice. If you get rich off this, her lawyers are going to pluck you clean. They can't. 3 years ago, right after she put that money in, I cried a little for her. Told her the company was under scrutiny from the tax authorities, and that to protect her from my corporate debts, we needed to sign a retroactive separate property agreement. The stupid woman hugged me and signed it without reading the fine print. When the old lady kicks the bucket and I get paid, I'll ask Elena for a divorce. She's too dumb to understand numbers. My hot, silent tears fell onto my phone screen. It wasn't pain. It was a rage so pure, so dense, it threatened to choke me. This whole time, while I packed his lunches for the office and canceled my own dreams one by one, he saw me as nothing but collateral damage. And what about the apartment you two live in? I know it's in her name, Valeria asked, moving closer to him. I heard the rustle of her dress against his suit. That's already handled, baby. Where do you think I got the funds to buy you that loft in Chimbury, paid in full? You told me it was a special executive bonus. It wasn't. 3 months ago, I took Elena's laptop while she was asleep. I used her digital certificate, forged her electronic signature, and took out a second mortgage on her apartment for $200,000. When she stops making payments next year, the bank will seize her home, and she won't even know where the blow came from. By the time she figures it out, we'll be drinking mojitos in Miami. I went completely still. The air left my lungs. $200,000. He wasn't just humiliating me. He had turned me into the victim of bank fraud and document forgery. I thought, absurdly, of the apartment itself in that moment, the one we'd bought together in our second year of marriage, back when I still believed we were building something instead of me simply being mined for parts. I had picked out every tile in that bathroom myself. I had drawn the floor plan for the kitchen renovation on my own drafting table, free of charge, because that's what a wife does for her husband's home. It had never once occurred to me that the same hands drawing those blueprints would one day need to draw up an entirely different kind of document just to survive him. Suddenly, the same phone that was recording lit up in my trembling hand. A WhatsApp message from Robert. I opened it silently, reading the text while listening to his breathing 18 inches above my head. Love, the meeting ran long. I'll be home late and exhausted. Can you make that baked salmon I like? You're the best wife in the world. Love you.
He was a textbook psychopath.
A psychopath in $800 shoes. You're a genius, Valeria purred. Come on, make the old woman sign the land papers already. This place smells like mothballs. Sign here, Grandma, Robert said, raising his voice again, using that sickeningly sweet, fake tone. Right on the dotted line. It's for your favorite grandson's gift. I watched through the gap in the tablecloth. I saw my grandmother Carmen's wrinkled hand trembling as it moved toward the legal papers. But it wasn't reaching for the pen. My grandmother's hand grabbed the handle of the heavy porcelain teacup, full of boiling black tea, and in one quick, calculated, strangely fluid motion for a woman supposedly suffering from dementia, she tipped the entire scalding liquid directly onto the legal documents and Robert's Oxford shoes. Son of a... Robert bellowed, jumping backward, shaking his burned foot. Ow, disgusting. What a filthy old woman. She splashed me, Valeria shrieked. Oh, how clumsy of me, dear, my grandmother stammered in a frail, trembling voice. You spilled dark water everywhere, you useless old woman. Robert screamed at her, his mask completely gone. The $5 million papers are ruined. Let's go, Valeria. I need to get to the office to print new copies and change my shoes. We'll come back tomorrow, Grandma. Try not to drool on yourself until then. Their footsteps hurried away down the hallway. The front door slammed shut with a sharp, final bang. Silence fell back over the house. I saved the recording, immediately uploaded it to 2 different cloud servers, and crawled out from under the table. I was pale, my heart hammering. I stood up expecting to find my grandmother frightened. Instead, Carmen was standing there, completely upright, without her cane, staring at the closed door with an expression of lethal coldness. There was no trace of senile confusion left in her eyes. Only fire. She looked straight at me. You've cried enough for that idiot child. He called you trash and just tried to rob us blind. Now wash your face and get your phone. Who do I call, Grandma? I asked, feeling ice begin to replace the blood in my veins. My grandmother smiled, and it was the most terrifying, beautiful smile I have ever seen in my life. Call Arturo, the notary. Robert thinks he tricked me with those papers, but he has no idea about the hidden clause we signed last week. We're going to leave him without a single cent and in a striped uniform. The next morning, Arturo's office smelled like strong coffee and old wood. The notary, a relentless 65-year-old man who had been my grandfather's closest friend, listened to the recording on my phone without blinking. When Robert's voice echoed through the room, calling me useful trash and bragging about the $200,000 mortgage fraud, Arturo turned off the speaker, took off his glasses, and looked at my grandmother. Carmen, this boy isn't just a narcissist. He's a textbook criminal, he said, his calm ice cold. I want you to crush him, Arturo, my grandmother answered, planting her cane into the carpet. I want you to take even the laces off those hideous shoes I ruined with the tea. We could go to the police right now over the fraudulent mortgage, Arturo explained to me. But there's a problem, Elena. That retroactive separate property agreement he had you sign 3 years ago is airtight. Legally, if you divorce him today, you won't touch a single staple of his company. I felt the floor disappear beneath me. I had lost. Arturo smiled, and it was the smile of a shark that had just scented blood in the water. He opened a heavy black folder. That would be true if we were talking about marital divorce law. But we're talking about corporate law. Robert never reads the fine print. When you injected that $120,000 of your inheritance, he thought he was fooling you. But he forgot that I drafted that contract. He pulled out a document stamped with a red notarial seal. Your $120,000 was never a gift to the marriage. It was a convertible loan to the business entity. Since he failed to repay the money with interest within 36 months, a term that expired exactly at midnight yesterday, you have the legal right to exercise the clause and convert that debt into 51% ownership of Fuentes Real Estate Group. You are the majority shareholder, Elena. He is quite literally your employee. The oxygen rushed back into my lungs all at once. And as for that $5 million land deal, my grandmother added, picking up a pen, Arturo, draft an irrevocable trust transfer. I'm signing over 100% of my properties and land holdings to my granddaughter. In under 2 hours, we signed everything. I walked out of that notary's office not as the tired wife of a construction executive, but as a multimillionaire and the absolute boss of the man who had planned to leave me homeless. But war requires a strong stomach. That same night, I had to swallow all of it. I got home before Robert and cooked his favorite dish, the baked salmon he demanded over WhatsApp while he was with his mistress. When he walked in reeking of Valeria's sweet perfume, I gave him my best plastic smile. What a day, my love, I'm exhausted. The investor meeting drained me completely, he sighed, kissing my cheek in a way that made me want to tear my own skin off. Poor thing, sit down. I'll take care of your suit. While he devoured the salmon, I went through his jacket pockets. I found a crumpled receipt from Suarez Jewelers. A diamond choker, $4,500, paid in cash. The exact same amount I deposited into our joint account every single month. I smoothed out the receipt in my hand. Useless trash was about to become very useful in digging his own grave. Over the following 7 days, while he played Wolf of Wall Street, I became a financial ghost. I canceled my cards, rerouted my salary, and traced the IP address behind the mortgage fraud. The signature had been executed from his office computer at 11:45 on a Tuesday morning, the exact day I had been at the hospital caring for his mother. Irrefutable proof. I want to be honest about something. Those 7 days were the hardest of my entire life, harder even than the moment under the table. It's one thing to feel betrayed in a single blinding instant. It's another thing entirely to sit across from a man every night at dinner, watch him tell you about his day, kiss you goodnight, and know with total certainty that he has already mentally spent your home, your future, your name, on a life with someone else. I kept a small notebook in my studio, hidden inside a rolled architectural blueprint, where I wrote down every lie he told me that week. By Friday, there were 11 entries. 11 separate moments where he looked me directly in the eyes and lied without so much as a flicker of hesitation. I stopped counting after that. Some numbers aren't meant to bring you comfort. They're meant to make you certain. But while reviewing the company's accounts, I found another leak. Monthly transfers of $1,000 to a homeowners association for a luxury vacation house in the coastal town of Alicante, my mother-in-law's summer chalet. The chance to use that information came the following Sunday at the obligatory family barbecue. We were in the garden. Robert was grilling meat, playing the macho provider in front of his uncles. I was in the kitchen with his mother, Montserrat, who wore her usual pearl necklace and looked at me with disdain. "Elena, the pool filter at the Alicante house broke," she said without even looking at me. "Fixing it costs $3,000. Since Robert is so stressed bringing home the bacon, I imagine you could use your little architect savings to cover it. We're family, aren't we?" She didn't have the shame to ask me for money for a house my own company had already been quietly financing for years. I decided to spring my trap. "Of course, Montserrat. Although Robert doesn't seem so stressed about money lately. In fact, he bought me a beautiful sapphire necklace just last week. He's probably saving it for our anniversary." My mother-in-law's brow furrowed, poison clouding whatever intelligence she had left. "Sapphires? I thought it was the diamond choker he took to Alicante." The words fell out of her before she could stop them. The silence between us turned to stone. "Alicante?" I asked, feigning innocence. "But Robert and I haven't been to Alicante all summer." Cornered, Montserrat decided to hide behind her own snobbery. She straightened her back and looked at me with disgust. "Don't play innocent, Elena. Successful men need distractions from routine. If my son needs to use my house to de-stress with someone fresher, you should learn to look the other way. Focus on keeping his house clean." I stared at her. She was lending them the bed for their affair, demanding I pay for the repairs on that very house, and on top of it all, demanding my total submission. "You're right, Montserrat," I said, very quietly, ice in my voice. "One must keep the house clean. And I think it's time to finally take out all the trash." Exactly 3 days remained before the grand gala celebrating Fuentes Group's 10th anniversary, held at Madrid's most exclusive country club. The black tie event where Robert planned, according to emails I'd intercepted, to formally introduce Valeria to society and announce the new direction of his life. And I was about to make them all the laughingstock of the entire city. The main ballroom of the country club was bathed in golden light and smelled of expensive perfume and old money. There were over 200 guests, investors, local politicians, well-known architects, and of course, Robert's entire family. My mother-in-law drifted between tables with a glass of champagne, bragging about her son's empire to her bridge club friends. I arrived alone, wearing an impeccable, severe black suit. I remember standing at the entrance for a moment before walking in, watching all of it through the glass doors, the chandeliers, the string quartet, the 200 people who had no idea they were about to become an audience. 15 years earlier, at our wedding, I had walked into a room just like this one believing I was starting a life. Tonight, I was walking into the exact same kind of room to end one, and the strange thing was how calm I felt. Not numb. Calm the way a surgeon is calm. I had rehearsed every line in my head so many times over the last 3 days that it no longer felt like anger. It felt like architecture. Load-bearing walls. One sentence at a time. The moment I stepped through the doors, Robert intercepted me. He wore a tailored tuxedo and brand new patent leather shoes to replace the ones my grandmother had scalded with tea. "Elena, love," he said, grabbing my arm too hard, his fingers digging in. "For protocol reasons, I've seated you at table 18, right next to the kitchen doors. I'll be at the head table with the investors. Don't make a scene tonight." I glanced toward table 1, right beside the stage. There was Valeria, in a red silk dress, the $4,500 diamond choker that had been paid for with money meant for my architectural work glittering under the chandeliers. "I don't mind at all, Robert," I answered, my voice so soft it was almost a whisper. "The view of the fall is always better from behind." I sat at my isolated table and waited. At 9:30, after dessert, the main lights dimmed and a spotlight hit the stage. Robert climbed the steps with the arrogance of an emperor. He took the microphone and the room fell silent. "Good evening. Tonight we celebrate 10 years of Fuentes Real Estate Group," he began, his voice carefully rehearsed. "Success isn't for the weak. It's for self-made men who have the courage to make difficult decisions." He paused dramatically, looking directly at Valeria. "That's why, for this company to reach its true potential, it's time to let go of the dead weight of the past. Tonight, I announce my official separation from Elena and my engagement to the woman who will inspire me through this new decade, Valeria." A collective gasp swept the room. Investors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My mother-in-law clapped twice, laughing discreetly behind her hand. He had just discarded me like trash in front of Madrid's elite. It was my turn. I rose slowly from table 18. My heels echoed against the wooden floor as I walked down the center aisle, a black flash drive in my right hand. I reached the sound control booth beside the stage and handed the drive to the technician, along with a $500 bill I had prepared that same afternoon. "Track 1, volume to maximum, lock the controls," I whispered. I climbed the steps to the stage. Robert took a step back, lowering the microphone. "Elena, you're drunk. Go home before I call security," he hissed through his teeth, pale with fury. "Excuse me," I said, snatching the microphone from him in one sharp motion. "My husband forgot to mention the majority shareholder of this company in his speech, and I believe she has an important message for our investors." I signaled the technician. Suddenly, Robert's own hoarse, disgustingly superior voice flooded the massive ballroom at full volume. "Elena is, how do I put this, useful trash. A maid with a ring on her finger. There won't be a single cent of this going to her." The silence was tomb-like. I could hear ice cubes clinking in trembling glasses at table 1. Valeria shrank into her seat. The audio continued merciless. "3 months ago, I took Elena's laptop while she was asleep, forged her electronic signature, and took out a second mortgage on her apartment for $200,000. When the bank seizes it, we'll be drinking mojitos in Miami." The room erupted. A banker at table 3 shot to his feet, red with fury. "This is ongoing fraud. I'm withdrawing my capital right now." Robert was sweating through his shirt. "This is fabricated," he shouted, grabbing for the microphone. "It's AI. She's insane." "No, Robert, you're the one who never learned to read the fine print." The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. The crowd parted to let Arturo through. The notary walked with a lethal kind of dignity, flanked by 2 private security guards. He climbed onto the stage and handed Robert an official folder. I picked up my own microphone. "At midnight yesterday, the 36-month term expired on the $120,000 convertible loan I put into this company to save it from ruin. Since it was never repaid, I have exercised the clause. As of this morning, I own 51% of the shares. I am the owner. And as my first executive decision, you're fired. No severance for embezzlement." I turned toward the head table, staring directly at Montserrat, who had gone white as a ghost in front of her friends. "And, Montserrat, I also won't be paying the $3,000 for the pool filter at your Alicante house. You know, that little love nest you lent your son so he could cheat on me, while I was the one bathing you after you broke your hip." The disgusted murmur from my mother-in-law's friends was music to my ears. Security grabbed Robert by the arms to drag him off the stage. He kicked and struggled, ruining his tailored suit, begging me to stop. Valeria was already running for the emergency exit, covering her face. But before Robert reached the doors, Montserrat's phone rang with a shrill beep. She looked at the screen, let out a strangled cry, and dropped to her knees on the floor, clutching her pearl necklace. Robert stopped fighting the guards when he saw his mother collapse. "Mom, what's wrong?" he shouted. Montserrat looked up, her eyes filled with pure terror, staring at me like I was death itself. The message she had just received wasn't a simple bank alert. It was notice that the very thing she'd used as leverage over me for years had just been taken from her, permanently, and by the same woman she'd once bathed with the same disdain she now looked at me with. Robert, in his desperation to fund his lifestyle and buy his mistress a loft in Chimbury, had used his mother's Alicante house as cross-collateral for the fraudulent $200,000 mortgage. The moment I froze his assets that afternoon, the bank moved to immediate foreclosure, and I, using funds from my grandmother's trust, had bought that debt from the bank in record time. The message my mother-in-law had just read was an official notice from her new owner. I was giving her exactly 48 hours to remove her belongings before I executed the eviction for non-payment. The woman who had demanded my submission and called me common had just been put out on the street by her own son's hand and mine. While his mother wept on the floor, Robert was dragged by the country club's security out to the curb. I followed at a slow, unhurried pace, savoring every second. When we stepped out into the cold night air, Robert searched desperately for Valeria's red dress. He found her a few yards away, climbing into a black car. "Valeria, love, wait," he shouted, breaking free from the guards and lunging for the car door. "This is a misunderstanding. My lawyers will fix it." Valeria looked him up and down with pure contempt. She no longer saw the arrogant young executive. She saw an unemployed man with a criminal case pending. "Let go of the door, Robert. I don't have time for losers." She slammed it shut. The car pulled away, leaving him alone, covered in dust and sweat, standing in the middle of the street. That same night, the police seized his $95,000 Porsche Cayenne as evidence of embezzlement. 3 months later, we saw each other for the last time, at family court. Robert looked like he'd aged 10 years. He wore a cheap suit that hung too loosely on him, and he was shaking. He was out on bail, awaiting trial. He had lost every friend in his social circle. His mother had stopped speaking to him after losing her house, and now lived in a modest boarding house on the outskirts of the city. Word had spread through Madrid's business circles faster than I expected. 2 rival development firms reached out to my office within the first week, not to poach clients, but simply to ask, carefully, delicately, whether I might be interested in a partnership now that I was running things myself. The same men who used to shake Robert's hand at galas and call me the architect's wife, in passing now addressed their emails directly to me. I found I didn't feel triumphant about that so much as tired, the particular exhaustion of finally being seen for something I had been doing quietly for 15 years. When the judge handed us the final divorce papers, Robert picked up the pen. He looked at me, his eyes glassy, trying one last time for pity. "We were together 15 years, Elena," he whispered. "We built the life. You took my company. Did you really have to put my mother out on the street? Don't you think you went too far?" I looked at him without a trace of emotion. "You are the director of a construction company, Robert. You should know that when the foundation is rotten, it's much safer to demolish the entire building than try to paint over it." I signed the papers, stood up, and walked out of that courthouse into the bright Madrid sunlight. 6 months have passed since that day. I sit now in the enormous leather chair in the executive office of Fuentes Real Estate Group. As the new CEO, profits are up 20%. My first executive decision was to rehire, with a raise, the 3 female architects Robert had illegally fired for getting pregnant. I also did something I never told anyone about until now. I quietly paid off Valeria's loft in Chimbury, the one Robert had bought with my stolen mortgage money, then immediately sold it and wired the proceeds into a scholarship fund at my old university, the same Milan program I'd once turned down to pay the mother-in-law who called me common. I named it after my own mother, whose inheritance had started this entire war without her ever knowing it. It felt like the only clean way to close that particular wound. Not revenge, exactly. Just correction. Yesterday, I visited my grandmother Carmen at her estate. We sat in the dining room, right above that same enormous Persian rug, the heavy oak table between us. My grandmother took a sip of her tea and ran her hand along the wood. Who would have thought the best seat in the entire house was down there on the floor? My grandmother said, smiling that sharp smile of hers. Sometimes, Grandma, I answered, you have to make yourself small so the monsters reveal their true size. Some people say I was too cruel, evicting my own mother-in-law from her home. But I've come to believe that mercy is only owed to people who never asked to receive it in the first place. My grandmother taught me that the quietest people in the room are often the ones who end up owning it. Robert spent 15 years believing that silence meant weakness, that a woman who cooked his dinner and folded his shirts had nothing left underneath but gratitude. He never once imagined that the same hands writing his checks were quietly building the very case that would take everything from him. I think about the version of myself who hid under that table sometimes, the one crying silently into her own knuckle so no one would hear her breathe. I don't feel sorry for her anymore, though I did for a long time. I feel grateful to her, in the strange way you can only feel grateful to a person you used to be. She's the one who stayed still when every instinct told her to scream. She's the one who understood, in the space of 4 minutes under a dinner table, that the smartest revenge is never the loudest one. It's the one that takes its time, gathers its evidence, and waits for the exact moment its target feels most invincible before pulling the floor out from under him in front of everyone he was trying to impress. In the end, he didn't lose his empire to a stranger, or to bad luck, or to the market. He lost it to the one person he was certain would never look up from the floor.